Hello, good evening and welcome. I'm Karima Brown and you're watching Political Exchange, where we unpack Africa's political economy. Now, South Africa's National Development Plan has come under much scrutiny with regards to implementation and, of course, funding. At a banking association summit last week, ANC Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa said that the financial services sector had a critical role to play in implementing the NDP. Joining me to discuss the funding of the NDP and, of course, broader infrastructure rollout plans is Banking Association of South Africa's MD, Cass Kuvadia. Cass, thank you so much for joining us. Let me give a quote that I'm sure you heard of Mr. Ramaphosa when he was there. He was saying that the implementation of the NDP is not an exercise in compliance, but rather an exercise in transformation and working together. Is that an accurate statement? Because very often the private sector do feel that it's, a bit of a stick that they're beaten with to come to the party.
No, I agree with Cyril. I think that we had this year's theme for our summit as the NDP, because as a banking association, and I think businesses more generally, we're very supportive of the NDP. We believe that it's the most cohesive plan that has a reasonably broad range of support. And we need to actually collaborate to make it a concrete document. I appreciate it's a plan. I appreciate it's not cast in stone. But I think there's sufficient in the NDP to enable business, government, labor, and other stakeholders to actually get together and begin to put national interest topmost of our agenda.
Right.
And within the context of national interest, begin to see how we work together, what compromises are necessary. And I think that we all need to sort of get out of our current paradigms and begin to see how we can really make a difference.
When I spoke with you last, Cass, you were speaking about this question of national interest, that it's important that all the social partners put national interest first. And you also said that government needs to act like it's in charge, that it has a mandate, that it's got over 60% of the vote, and that it needs to lead as government. And that is often read as code for don't listen to your detractors in the alliance, move, go ahead. I've interviewed President Jacob Zuma on this matter. I've interviewed Trevor Manuel of the NPC on this matter. And they all acknowledge that the plan isn't perfect, but that there is no more time to be in a process paralysis, that we need to get on with it. If that is the case, and I sense that's exactly your sentiments as well, what exactly is the Banking Association's view of where they can key in? Where is it that they can latch on and become partners with the state?
One of the things Cyril said is that while we don't agree on the entirety of the plan, where we do agree, let's get on and start doing it. Now, we fully believe that. We met with a Minister of Planning about 6 to 8 weeks ago. Right. And we identified 4 areas that the banking industry can get involved in. The one is obviously infrastructure. And there we have to get involved in with other actors, government being a critical actor, long-term institutional funders, and then major corporates being, and then some of the DFIs. The second area is human settlement development, and particularly also beginning to do some work on spatial planning and so on. We do a lot of work on human settlements anyway, but to step that up a bit. The third area is support of SMEs, and again, it's something that we're involved in, but I think that greater collaboration across government agencies, ourselves, venture capitalists, I think can make a difference. And the fourth one is financial inclusion. Again, a big issue. As a developing country, we reasonably successful. 67% of bankable people are banked, according to the last FundScope study. But again, more to be done there. Banks are involved in that. And so we believe that these are 4 areas that we can begin working on. We're putting together something to put to the minister.
Right. This is the planning minister.
Planning minister, and to see how the NPC can facilitate interaction with other government players and so on. On the infrastructure side, we're part of a National Treasury-led committee that's been put together to identify and unblock blockages. But what we're pushing very hard for, we're also working on the BLSA, and we're pushing very hard that let's identify 3 or 4 projects. Right. Let's then put public and private sector project specialists around those and say, right, guys, structure this. So to the stage that we can bring it to market. And as they're getting their hands dirty, they identify problems, they identify issues, then we can deal with those issues. But at least they're informed by getting hands dirty and not rhetorical debate at the policy level and so on. So I think there's a whole lot of areas that we can actually begin to work on.
Now, when the ANC had its recent Lekgotla, just prior to the cabinet having its Lekgotla, the party came up and said a task team needed to be appointed to unblock precisely, blockage areas, red tape. The Secretary General of the ANC was saying, for example, if something has to be rezoned, why does it take, a couple of months to do that? Is that not one council meeting? Now, the task team that you're talking about with the minister, are you making yourselves available for that task team that the ANC is talking about, or is this a separate, group of people that we're talking about? Because it sounds as if it's quite similar.
Yeah, look, I mean, we'd be willing to participate in any task team that can make progress. The task team that I'm talking about, where we're saying let's identify and deal with blockages, was started by National Treasury. Okay. And the PICC sits on there, ourselves, CISA, Transnet, Department of Public Enterprises, CESPO sits on that as well. And we've agreed that the terms of reference of that task team is to have a watching brief over actual projects that come onto the table, and then where blockages are identified, help break through those blockages. The task team has met with individual financial institutions. We facilitated the banking meetings, CISA, the institutional investor meetings, and the task team is beginning to understand what financial organizations are saying about infrastructure. And every bank we've spoken to have used the renewable energy project as an example of how we should do it. And why? Because it was properly coordinated. National Treasury was involved throughout the process. The private sector was brought in early in the process. There was transparency. Decisions were taken, and they stood by the decisions. And so one of the things we, post the summit, want to do is seriously unpack the renewable energy process
and look at what lessons,
see if we can actually replicate that.
Now, given the fact that the brief to the ministries is always to be cross-cutting, to not work in silos, to draw in partners such as yourselves and all the relevant stakeholders, is there appetite to do that across what needs to happen on the NDP? I mean, if it's working in renewable energy, for example, why is transport such a difficult thing? I mean, if you look at, for example, the whole e-toll mess that we're sitting with in Gauteng, there the big criticism has been that the process wasn't transparent, according to some critics, that the financing was opaque, that nobody knows who was involved. And of course, today we're sitting with a project that, is very much kind of hanging up in the air. And a lot of people who brought money to the party is now saying, was this worth the risk? So you literally have two ways of doing it on the table. How do you prevent the e-toll saga from not happening again?
Yeah, again, I think it's by getting the relevant people around the table. I think we all need to also, accept that we're going to have to push each other's boundaries.
There can be no holy cows here.
Yeah, there can be no holy cows here. We need to structure these things in a way that makes sense for all parties. We need to allocate risk and capital appropriately. And I think we all need to appreciate that the sort of conjuncture at the moment is such that we are missing out on opportunities that can take this country to the potential it can get to. And very often I think we talk past each other. Very often I think there's still some, in fact not some, a fair degree of distrust between business and government. Despite all the conversations we have, despite all the structures we have to talk. And I think that we now really need to, and very often that distrust comes about because we keep on talking at a high level. Here, I think that
you need implementation.
What we're saying through the banking summit is that we are ready to come to the table. Okay, we are ready to come to the table in the normal course of our business, outside of our business with other stakeholders, And let's actually put our heads together, get our hands dirty, and show real implementable programs, and show that we can actually do this if we're talking the right language.
Now, of course, the World Cup hosting has been the one thing that everyone's pointed to as the way in which to do it, insofar as commitment, getting the projects in on time, on budget, this national effort that came behind the matter. But we saw, of course, later on the collusion in the construction industry, and it undercuts and it undermines a lot of the value and the goodwill and the things that people thought we ought to be, celebrating. Cass, you often at the cusp of that intersection between business and the private sector on the one hand and government on the other hand. And we're talking about this mistrust here. How does it happen that a project that we praise for getting it all right on time is so horribly dented by the collusion, scandal and corruption scandal? I mean, let's call it what it is in the construction sector.
Yeah, look, I think firstly, we look at the World Cup as an example, and the bottom line is that there we had somebody sitting in Switzerland who said somebody here is going to coordinate and manage that. And if you guys don't deliver this at this time, you're not getting this World Cup. And
there were consequences for not delivering.
Bottom line, right? We didn't have much of a choice in it, and so we delivered. What happened in the construction industry, there can be absolutely no excuse for it. And I think that what we need to do is, Competition Commission has been through the process and so on, and whatever fines have been levied, that's done and dusted, I guess, to a certain extent. But let's also, I think, sit down and let's understand. Some people tell me, and I'm not that close enough to the construction game to actually do this. Some people tell me that given the tight time frames, given the urgency of the matter, if they didn't sit down and divvy this up between themselves, it wouldn't have happened.
Well, that was the very argument that Peter Bruce tried to advance in Business Day.
Right now, as I said, I wasn't intricately involved in that. But I think what we need to do is we need to make a fair, objective assessment of exactly what happened. If there was pure corruption and collusion, then we must understand that, and we must, in structuring tenders in future and in structuring these packages in future, let's be more transparent. Let's actually ensure that right up front everybody knows what the rules of the games are, and let's also ensure right up front that you have severe downside for actually playing outside of the rules.
Well, let's hope that that is the way forward and that it doesn't replicate itself. Cass, we have to take a short break, but when we return, we will continue the discussion around how to finance the NDP and, of course, the other infrastructure rollout programs that is meant to kickstart growth in the South African economy. Don't go away.